He had to quick think of that. He wasn't sure if he decided his fake podcast was over or not. Man stalks girl, follows her around, murders her.
I mean, now I'm just wearing like an investigator.
Yeah, now you're the detective.
Right.
Okay.
Of
Now
course.
we're
This is true crime
investigating.
podcast.
This is a crime. The crime here is Tanner's lies.
Exactly.
Hello and welcome to this episode of I Should Have Known, the trivia game show that can't be trusted. Each week, one of our Quizmasters will present you with 4 facts about a topic, but one of those facts is a lie. And we are doing Stranger Than Fiction this month to celebrate Halloween. And today we have quite a meta episode. Our Quizmaster is Tanner.
Hello.
And he is going to be presenting you with a Find the Fake episode on true crime podcasts. So he will tell us about 4 podcasts that cover true crime, except one of these podcasts he has invented, and it covers a fictional crime. So some kind of crime from fiction that maybe we're supposed to know. I don't know. We'll see. So join me, Andi, and our other host, Sups, in figuring out which one of his podcasts is Stranger Than Fiction.
It's about true crime, but one is not true.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with the pub quiz question.
All right. PQQ.
What true crime podcast did the New York Times call podcasting's first breakout hit?
Oh, no.
I know we're podcasters and apparently we're supposed to know things about podcasts, but I have no idea.
Oh, what is that called? It's like one word,
It's easily the most famous
and it's like...
Crime.
crime podcast. It's
No,
not just
it's
one
like-
word.
it's
It's
like-
not crime. Yeah, it is one word.
It's kind of like a play on words.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
cereal.
Serial.
Oh, yes, I got it.
Yeah, that's true.
Serial.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a pun on serial crimes and
Right.
serial episodes and podcasts.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The whole true crime genre is like, not my thing. So this should be very interesting.
That was an easy one. That
Oh,
was like
no.
lowball.
I think I've listened to like 5 minutes of true crime podcast. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. So do you think that someone who's into true crime podcasts, would this be super easy to them?
Yeah.
Okay. It'll be entertaining for
Yeah.
you to hear how stupid we sound.
Yeah,
Because we don't
exactly.
know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
It should be fun. But I want to reiterate. So you invented a fake podcast,
Mhm.
and that fake podcast covers a fictional crime.
Right.
So it's kind of 2 ways to approach this. So we'll
Exactly.
see.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We'll see how that goes.
Yes.
Okay.
So actually, all of these podcasts cover multiple crimes, but it's like one.
Incident.
Yeah. Some of them are bloody.
Ugh. All right, but we're not debating if the crimes happened.
Right.
We're debating if someone made a
podcast.
podcast. So
That's
okay.
right.
Okay.
Podcast number 1, The Shrink Next Door. The crimes covered in this are manipulation, coercion, and fraud. And so it tells the story of a shrink who slowly, through psychological manipulation, takes over his patient's life. He isolates him from his family, has him transfer over his assets, and there's eerie emotional control exerted over him.
That's creepy.
Hmm.
And tell us about the podcast.
So the host of this podcast is Joe Nocera. Through personal interviews and investigative journalism, he uncovers how this shrink took over this other guy's life.
Okay, so each episode is talking about like an element of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Here are a couple episode names. Welcome to the Neighborhood, Sibling Rivalry, and The Decision.
Okay.
And is this podcast still running?
No, it's over.
Okay. He had to quick think of that. He wasn't sure if he decided his fake
Listen,
podcast
yeah.
was over or not.
And I'm guessing this is an American podcast?
Yes.
Okay.
Interesting.
The Shrink Next Door.
Okay, this is interesting because what little I know about true crime, it's that it's murders and like usually women, and it's always the husband.
Usually the woman is blonde.
Yeah, right.
Right.
She's a white woman, obviously.
Yeah.
Come on, that was just so it's interesting that we started off with something that's not murder, creepy,
Yeah.
and gross, but not murder.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, do I think people would want to listen to that?
Yes, I agree to the point that this is not your standard true crime podcast, right?
Yeah, I mean, but what do we know? We have established we don't really know.
But what I really liked is that this was like he actually went and interviewed like the real characters of this crime, right?
Yeah. Personal
Okay.
interviews.
Or people.
Or people. Yeah. Okay.
Soups already is suspicious of this one.
That's very interesting. Well, I have to say, honestly, I've never heard of this host.
He's sitting being like, I've never heard of you either.
So, but just the plot itself, I think it's like quite interesting. I really like the plot.
Yeah, I think this one probably real
Yes.
because I do think people would be interested in hearing about psychological manipulation.
Yes.
And also, do I think Tanner would have come up with that? There wasn't really anything about the podcast itself that told us much.
Which is
Yeah.
why I think this is true.
Okay.
We know a thing or two about lying, right? After lying for 4 years, I think the description was really straightforward, and this comes from the show notes, which is what makes me think
Okay.
that he didn't try to, like, make it a little
Yeah.
bit twisty, turny, like,
That makes it a little suspicious, but I'm not sure. We'll definitely have to hear more.
All right. Podcast number 2, A Life at Stake. The crimes of stalking, abuse, kidnapping, and murder. It tells a story of this woman who gets in a toxic relationship with this guy who stalks her, moves across country lines to follow her, abuses her, eventually murders her. The host is journalist Vanessa Cantata. She tells the story through letters and journal entries of the woman.
Okay.
The episode titles include Nightfall, The Transformation, and The Hunt Begins.
Okay.
It is not around anymore. It was about 7 episodes.
Oh, a very short 1-season run.
Yeah.
This one was a little more interesting as far as the elements of the podcast goes, because making it more of a narrative, more like a story, less of just like, this happened and I interviewed these people, which is interesting, but like, okay.
The name of the host, that's such a podcaster name. Like a Vanessa.
Yeah.
Shout out to Vanessa. You have a great true crime podcast name. But I'm also very, very suspicious about this one, actually.
Yeah.
Definitely more suspicious than number 1.
What's suspicious about it to you?
My head just goes to like 4 or 5 Netflix series that I can think of from the plot.
Well, Soups, I can't be the first person to tell you this,
Yeah.
but men murder a lot of women.
It's not
So,
a new concept.
Oh, wow.
Like-
Thank you for enlightening me. I had no idea.
but yeah, there are a lot of stories
You're
of
right.
man stalks girl, follows her around, murders her.
I think
So,
it's more common than we would like to think about it.
I feel you that the plot doesn't sound particularly unique,
Right.
which that's a good point. Like, why
Yes.
this crime? I'm guessing that the whole crossing international lines is more interesting, and Tanner's just kind of like, doesn't want us to know. What I liked is that, and it makes me both suspicious and makes me feel like it's real, is
Okay.
that it's creative.
Mhm.
I mean, it's epistolary. It's
Yeah.
all like letters and stuff. So that's,
That element, I really liked it.
yeah. So
Mhm.
that's either like a really cool setup for a podcast, and that
Yeah.
would make sense that Tanner would pop up as like, this is a cool true crime podcast, or it's an epistolary novel that he based the crime off
crime.
of. So
Yeah.
I'm more suspicious of this one than the first one.
Yes.
The first one was much more vanilla than this one.
What did you say the title was? A Life at Stake?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a cool title.
Maybe we should hear some more.
All right.
See what we think.
Podcast number 3, S-Town. The crimes covered in this podcast are suspected murder, a possible cover-up, corruption, and suicide.
That's why I paused.
Yeah.
I was like, huh.
So host Brian Reed investigates through interviews and actually going to S-Town, the son of a wealthy family who allegedly has been bragging that he got away with murder. Along the way, a nasty feud takes place, a hunt for hidden treasure, and another unexpected body.
Okay.
The podcast, it's through interviews. It's 7 episodes. Some titles would be, If You Keep Your Mouth Shut, You'll Be Surprised What You Can Learn.
That's a title?
That's a chapter. They're really like quotes or like weird sentences.
Yeah,
Kind
you
of
don't-
thing.
And you don't really need the titles
Yeah.
anyway, because
Yeah.
you're just auto playing through
right.
through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
Okay.
But okay, Brian or Tanner, those are not very good titles. I'm just gonna throw that out
Yes.
there. I'm sorry to say.
Can I just say, when you were saying this, I just felt this is like a 90s Bollywood movie. I swear. I could
You've
pick
seen
up.
this?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
could
yeah.
just totally imagine like at least 2 movies I know which have the exact same plot line that you just described. Like a rich dude, like, bragging with his friends,
Yeah.
like that girl
Yeah.
or whatever, murdered. Yes.
Yeah, I guess this time now, instead of being like just men are terrible, now rich men. Again, this story has been told many times. Do we think Tanner went into the Bollywood archives for his fiction? That would be a twist.
Yes.
Major twist.
I mean, yes.
And the podcast question, S-Town. Is it actually called S-Town, or did you just not want to say the name of the town?
It is actually called S-Town.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Because I was thinking maybe he didn't want to say the name of the town because it'd be too obvious. I don't know why it's like thinking like anime or something when you say that, but I don't know. When you first said that, I immediately was thinking of Pokemon for some reason.
And this one also has 7 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, now I'm just wearing like an investigator.
Yeah, now you're the
hat,
detective.
right?
Okay.
Of
Now
course.
we're
True crime
investigating.
podcast.
This is a crime. The crime here is Tanner's lies.
Exactly. The number of episodes is the same as the second podcast.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Why would he choose that? The episode titles, I'm sorry, is pretty bad.
It kind of sounds like an AI came up with those names.
So that's what makes me, one, think that this is a possible fake one.
Uh-huh.
The fact that I have this vague connection, but also the name, Brian, not a super like Vanessa. That's a podcasting name. Like Brian, True
You're
Crime.
just talking about people's
I mean, do we
You're
have any
really
scientific...
grasping at straws here. But the crime itself was bonkers.
Yeah.
Like, it definitely sounds like something you would want to cover in a podcast or
Very
some kind of show because it's very interesting, or is fiction, right? Like there's a treasure hunt at some point, you said.
Yeah.
I mean, that's larger than life. That's stranger than fiction, I think. So it's tricky. It's tricky. We have one more.
One more.
See if you can wow us with this one, because otherwise we're going with the middle two.
Podcast number 4, called Dirty John. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
That's the name.
Okay, cool.
The crimes covered are theft, endangerment, stalking, and attempted murder. The host is Christopher Goffard, and he covers, again, a toxic relationship between a guy named John and this woman. And he starts out, available, handsome, attentive, and he increasingly turns dangerous, deceptive, and ultimately it's the woman's fight for survival. And so Christopher tells it in a narrative using interviews, police reports, documents to further expose John. It is 6 episodes. Episode titles are Newlyweds, Forgiveness, and Escape.
Cool. Was podcast number 1 also 6 episodes,
Yes.
right? Yep. Okay.
These all have a very short run.
Yeah, well, they're usually like 45 to 60 minutes.
Yeah,
so
right.
there's fewer episodes in a season, and some of them only did 1 season.
Of all the 4 podcasts that I've heard, this one sounds the most real to me.
Oh.
In terms of like the format and the setup and the crime itself, I think this is something that people would want to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my feeling.
I was going to say kind of the opposite, where it sounds so contrived that it's like, well, yeah, this is among the true crime podcasts.
Right.
I could come to the same conclusion, but for the opposite reason, that to me, this is what true crime podcasts, this is what they're about. This is the story. Some guy is Mr. Perfect and then turns bad.
Dirty.
I cannot, that name, I'm sorry, but no. So that's the plot of every true crime podcast. I guess no one actually got murdered in this one. We only have attempted murder. So that's nice, I guess.
One life saved.
Do we think that Tanner invented that title?
Yeah. In this case, I would like to give Tanner some credit, because I think if he were to invent, he would not come up with Dirty John. I have higher expectations from him.
I feel like he would know that name. We would be like, that's ridiculous. We would just laugh him right out of this room. Be like, get out of the studios. That's ridiculous. So yeah, I feel like someone else must have done that. What does that mean? Is that a pun? Christopher, explain yourself, please. Is Dirty John, is that a pun?
I'm trying to think. It's like a euphemism for something.
I know, right? Exactly. I'm like, is that
Dirty John?
is that a phrase from something? I don't know.
I can imagine.
Okay, but there was nothing really about the description of the podcast itself that really told me much. It was kind of like the first one, where it was just a little bit they tell the story.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've heard all the true crime podcasts. and the crimes that inspired them. But one of them is a Tanner fake covering a fictional crime. But before we guess which one is stranger than fiction, Tanner, can you please repeat the 4 podcasts for us?
Podcast number 1, The Shrink Next Door. Podcast number 2, A Life at Stake. Podcast number 3, S-Town. And podcast number 4, Dirty John. One of those is a fake podcast about a fictional crime.
It's a Tanner Shrink original. We didn't really talk about the names of the hosts because they don't really give anything away. Like Tanner invented one of these names or borrowed it from somewhere. So like...
What was the first host's name?
Joe Nacero.
Joe. So we've got Joe, Vanessa,
Brian,
and
Christopher.
Christopher. Okay.
Christopher's last name was the only one that sounded like Tanner didn't come up with that.
Yeah.
You know?
But I also like that we have a female representation.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Assuming that one's real.
But Vanessa is a very cool name.
It's funny because to me, that's the one I'm most suspicious of.
Okay. What are your first thoughts?
The second one is suspicious because of the podcast structure, not the crime. And the third one is suspicious because of the crime, not the podcast structure.
You're bang on. I think
Yeah.
100%. I have nothing additional to add to your commentary on the second and the third podcast. I agree.
Yeah.
For me, the third story is bizarre. I don't think this is an American setup.
Yeah.
The second one sounds very TV-ish. Okay, well, it's time to pick one. So which one are you going with?
I'm going to go with number 2.
Okay, so I'm going to go with number 3 then. But I think it's one of those.
Yeah.
All right. So you're picking 2 and 3?
Yeah.
Okay. The good news is that one of you is right.
Yeah.
So our listeners can tune in to the other 2.
We were pretty
Definitely check that
confident in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty good detective work.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, great
All
job.
right.
The Shrink Next Door really is about this weird doctor.
That's creepy.
And Dirty John really does
Team,
happen.
that's my only problem with that is
Yeah.
the name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dirty. Is that a pun? Am I missing something with the name of that show?
I don't know. They
Okay.
didn't explain it.
Okay.
The fake one is number 2.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
I also have a suspicion of what the fiction is.
Oh.
You think you know what one it is?
I think I know. Yeah.
What's the crime or who's the criminal?
You gave yourself away for 2 reasons. One, you made it epistolary.
Yeah.
With the letters?
Yep, with letters. And then you couldn't resist a pun in the title.
Mm-hmm. So what is it?
It's a life at stake, as in what you use to murder a vampire because it's Dracula.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I couldn't resist. I had to get it in there.
Yeah.
Couldn't resist. I was like,
I wanted like a taste for blood.
Yeah,
it
or,
took me a little bit to get it. And then I asked the name again. And I was like,
Yeah.
a life at stake.
that MFer put a pun in his fake title.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I made up Vanessa Cantata.
Yeah. How?
As I said, that's a very cool podcasty name.
Yeah.
Like, how did you come up with
So
Vanessa?
So I wanted a woman, and I took a character in Dracula named Van Helsing,
Oh.
and I made Van Vanessa.
Mm.
And then I was like, okay, how do I get Helsing? I was like, sing. And then the word cantata just occurred
Okay.
to me. So I'm like, that sounds like
Yeah.
a podcaster name.
Yeah, that does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Auntie, you want to take that as like your stage name? Like we just change it.
Vanessa
to, like,
Cantata.
You don't
to
like my
Vanessa.
name, Soups?
maybe that's my
It's like
drag name or
hosted
something.
by Tanner Soups and Vanessa. Now that sounds so cool. That's a podcast I would listen to.
Oh, wow. I'm the problem on the podcast. It's my name. I don't have a podcasty enough name. Me with my man's name over here.
I'll change my name to Brian.
My
No,
boy's
please
name.
don't. Please don't. What about the third podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
S-Town, they named it S-Town because it's short for shit town.
What?
I don't know. The explanation doesn't really help. This guy hates his town in Alabama.
Okay.
He calls it a shit town. And he calls in NPR and he's like, investigate this rich guy. He keeps saying he killed somebody. And so they come down and investigate. So it's actually made by the same people who made Serial. So This
Oh,
American
okay.
Life people.
I mean, the crime that it's based off of sounds stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
But yeah, you couldn't resist the pun,
had
and
to
it
get it in
gave
there.
you away
Yeah.
Yeah.
that it was
Yeah.
Dracula.
But also,
Yeah.
to be honest, when you were doing this description, that's the exact also plot line
Uh-huh.
for this Netflix TV series, You.
Oh yeah, does it sound like
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like the
well,
toxic
maybe
relationship, the
toxic
stalking.
relationship, stalker,
Yeah.
crossing international boundary lines, and
maybe
murder.
they were inspired by
Yeah.
Dracula.
Who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
that was also a novel, and that's why I was asking. Like,
Oh,
I
that's what
see.
you're thinking.
Yeah.
The fact that it was letters
Yeah,
also kind
yeah.
of gave it away, but it was the pun in the name that did you in.
Yeah.
It was the stake in the heart of your lie.
Yeah. I couldn't resist.
All right, but it was spooky getting
Yeah.
Dracula in there for Halloween.
well done.
One of the most common Halloween costumes.
You know, spooking it up. So
yeah, well done.
yeah, I should have known.
I should have known.
I should have known.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Should Have Known. We will be continuing with our Stranger Than Fiction theme for the rest of the month, celebrating Halloween. Next week, I will be your Quizmaster, and I'm going to be talking about cryptids beyond Bigfoot. So be on the lookout for that, or on the hunt, maybe? Well, we'll see. And as always, thanks for listening. There's no Hippocratic oath for dominatrices, okay?